certificate of acknowledgement. Paul McMahon of the Mothership, in recognition of your good works on behalf of our town, Woodstockers United for Change, WUC, is pleased to bestow upon you this inaugural Good Work Award. Our mission to promote constructive awareness of town issues, which includes exposing those actions that may cause harm or disadvantage to our community, must also include acknowledging those which instead offer solutions and promote good stewardship of our resources. It's our pleasure to recognize and encourage those efforts that help restore our little colony of the arts to the creative and caring sanctuary we all wish it to be. In this wonderful instance, we are amazed, heartened, and most appreciative of your gift to your friends and neighbors in the form of the Woodstock Music Walk. As some of us strolled along Tinker Street we've known so well that evening, it was as if Planet Woodstock were once more completely intact, and our shared vision of restoring this place to its essential nature may someday come to pass. Your vision and ability to gather so many talented local musicians along the entire commercial stretch at an early hour with a soothing acoustic vibe that seemed to sow peace and harmony in the face of previous discord was just a statement made by music we all needed to hear. So we are pleased, in the spirit of affirming and protecting Woodstock's legacy, to not only recognize your awesome achievement, but to encourage and offer support to yourself and all that wish to contribute to future projects that may soothe, invigorate, and inspire our community. Woodstockers United for Change, October 2024. This is the award letter, this is the certificate, I should say, to Paul McMahon for his Woodstock Music Walk, which reminded us all of the kind of creative, peaceful, neighborly, and fun town Woodstock was meant to be and can be again. And we will hopefully be your awards in the coming whatever.
Wow. Thank you so much. Could have knocked me over with a feather. Feathers are powerful. Gee, I just want to say thank you so much, and I love Woodstock. This is like, Woodstock is like, it's not like anywhere else. And it would be nice if it was more contagious to more of the world, and maybe it will be. So, you know, why not have fun?
Yeah, more music.
This is why we're here, because we all love Woodstock. And I'm privileged to be working with a group of people who are so dedicated and hardworking, with no hidden agendas, just because of the love of Woodstock.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan. So, you know, thanks for bearing with us, but we were trying to figure out how are we going to squeeze in this award. So this was the time to do it. So now back to the Chris and Stephanie show.
Just hang on a minute, Steph. Okay, so just so as you know what you're in for tonight, here's the agenda of what we're doing. We've done the WUC Award. Stephanie and I are going to give you some basic information. Then we're going to introduce the panelists, or they're going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to get to question time. Question time is in two parts. First, we have some questions of our own that we want to put to the panelists, and then we're going to throw it open to the audience. Okay.
So welcome everyone to the Woodstockers United for Change Town Hall. Tonight we're going to ask the question, is Woodstock's water safe? I'm Stephanie Kaplan.
And I'm Chris Bailey. We are two members of a citizens watchdog group called Woodstock United for Change. Our mission is to bring attention to issues of significance affecting the residents of our town. Tonight, we're focusing on the troubling rise of forever chemicals in our town water supply.
We have a panel of experts who you'll hear from shortly, after which you'll have your chance to ask questions unfiltered by us so you can get the answers that you need.
Okay, but first let's start with a few basic definitions and a bit of history to frame the conversation. All right, this is a good one. Polyfluoroalkyl substances are also known as PFAS or PFAS. PFAS is a diverse group of thousands of chemicals known as forever chemicals because they take years to break down. One of the thousands of PFAS chemicals is called perfluorooctane sulfonate, also known as PFOS, PFOS. So, just to summarize, the PFAS is the umbrella group and PFOS is one of the chemicals in that group. So hopefully now you know your PFAS from your elbow.
Once ingested, PFAS can lead to health problems including liver damage, thyroid disease, fertility issues, and according to the National Cancer Institute, PFAS are associated with causing a variety of cancers including testicular, breast, kidney, ovarian and endometrial, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, thyroid cancer, childhood leukemia, among others.
We're here tonight because since 2022, PFOS have been found in ever-increasing numbers in our water, right here in Woodstock. Now, the New York Constitution guarantees us the right to clean water, but the various government agencies that are supposed to protect our water have set different maximum levels of PFOS that is allowable for us to ingest before towns must act. They call these the maximum contaminant levels.
Thank you for saying. Anyway, so what are these levels? The New York State DEC has set 2.7 parts per trillion of PFAS as their maximum contaminant level. The US EPA has set 4 parts per trillion as their maximum contaminant level. Unfortunately, this is a guide at least until 2029 when this standard will become enforceable.
Currently, the only enforceable MCL, or maximum contaminant level, has been set by the New York State Department of Health, and that's at 10 parts per trillion. But they will be required to reduce their MCL to 4 parts per trillion in 2029, when the EPA standard becomes enforceable. But for now, it remains at 10.
Many of us don't want to wait until 2029 or until the amount of poison in our water reaches 10 parts per trillion, when we know from these other agencies that much lower levels of PFAS is toxic. In fact, the EPA says there are no safe levels of PFAS.
And don't forget that drinking the water is not the only way that PFAS gets into our bodies. We absorb them when bathing as well. Okay, so now for some local history. Prior to 2021, the town was not testing for PFAS in its annual water test. In 2021, they ran the test, but the testing technology was unable to detect levels below 2 parts per trillion, and because of that limitation, PFAS was not detected. In 2022, PFAS first appeared in the Woodstock water supply with a rate of 0.86 parts per trillion. And just a year later, in 2023, the rate quadrupled to 3.48. Remember, this result is larger than the maximum contaminant level set by the DEC, and it's just under the level set by the EPA.
Luckily, 2 members of our group, one of whom will be your moderator tonight, realized the import of this alarming rising trend and started to reach out and publicize the fact that our water was contaminated with PFAS. Enough voices were raised that the town has now agreed to quarterly testing. So Chris, what's happening this year in 2024?
Well, Stephanie, I'm glad you asked that. The first results from the spring test showed that the PFAS level had apparently dropped to 1.86, which the town characterized as non-detectable. But don't pop the champagne cork too quickly. Our 2 water-savvy members reached out to the testing lab and got the raw data to review. And they discovered there was erroneous reporting. The lab then admitted their error and reissued a corrected report that showed the levels of PFOS was actually 2.39 parts per trillion.
And that was in the spring of this year. So the next quarterly test came out this summer. Once again, results were not posted until after one of the HV1 reporters actually got his hands on the data and published them, showing PFAS levels actually measured at 3.16 parts per trillion.
And so right now, we have levels in our town water larger than the DEC maximum contaminant level of 2.7, but just below the EPA's 4 parts per trillion maximum contaminant level.
We're here today because we believe it's not okay for us to be drinking even a little bit of poison before action is mandated. We're here because we want our town to act before Woodstock becomes Love Canal. And on that note, we're going to hand this over to our moderator, Vince Now. Vince has over 50 years of experience developing solutions to environmental challenges. His experience includes working on micro-ozonation for complete waterborne contamination destruction, natural systems advanced wastewater treatment, groundwater contaminant modeling, and a host of other experimental and applied developments within the environmental sciences.
Anyway, I've been a professional geologist for a really long time. I'm an old lady. I worked a lot in petroleum geology, and then I moved back to New York and worked mostly on groundwater contamination and cleaning up groundwater sites. But PFAS has entered our world in the past few years. It's not something like dry cleaning fluid, which has been around like forever, at least probably since 1900. And we don't know a lot about it. But with I have one first question. What laboratory did the analytical work for this town?
The lab that the town was using for, let's see, 2021, 22, and 23 was JH Consulting. But they farmed, they don't have a mass spec, so they don't perform PFAS testing. They shopped it out to another firm. And that firm had reported the result correctly, but JH did not transfer it to their report for the town when the snafu occurred. So the town, I think, fired them and is now using ATL in Poughkeepsie.
Oh, goodness. Okay, my advice is going to be that we find out and we get it changed. The best laboratory has, York Analytical Laboratories, has just built a lab down in Queens to do the PFAS work. And I would trust them above anybody else at this time. So somehow we have to figure that out and get it arranged. Because it sounds like the town hires a contractor who comes and takes a sample, who then sends it to some laboratory. So there's a lot of different people that have something to do with this. And the biggest problem with PFAS is we are measuring in parts per trillion. There is no other contamination at this time that we measure in parts per trillion. Everything else is in parts per billion. Like if you were measuring benzene or some other type of hydrocarbon or volatile organic compounds. So the parts per trillion is really tricky because it's very easy to, in the process of taking the sample, introduce something. Like if you were wearing Gore-Tex. Gore-Tex has some PFAS material in it. So that already now it's in the air because you're wearing this garment, and it could get into the bottle that you're putting the water into. So this is a very tricky problem. It's not straightforward at all. Anyway, that's kind of where my head is about PFAS at the moment, and I'll try to answer any questions I can, and I know there are other people here who...
But there is a process.
Thank you, Catherine.
For gathering it.
Bob, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that'll work. Hi, good evening all. Let's try this. There we go.
Good evening all. My name is Rob Hayes. I'm the Senior Director of Clean Water with a group called Environmental Advocates New York. We're a statewide nonprofit organization, mostly based up in Albany, New York, which is where I'm from. And we mostly focus on kind of state-level environmental policy change and trying to get the state legislature and the governor to enact good state laws and regulations that protect public health and further environmental justice. And so I lead up all of the clean water campaigns for environmental advocates, and I have now worked for all 6 years of my time with this organization on the issue of PFAS chemicals. PFAS really came to life in the state of New York with the Hoosick Falls and Newburgh water crises back around 2015, 2016 that folks might remember, and has continued to be an issue across the state ever since then. So I've worked with a lot of different communities facing PFAS contamination, from Hoosick Falls and Newburgh to others like down in Rockland County and New Lebanon, New York. So I have a lot of experience helping communities kind of dealing with their local contamination, but also then trying to connect them to a lot of the state level advocacy that is happening on the PFAS issue. Because one of the things that we at Environmental Advocates have tried to do for the last number of years is expand testing and treatment for PFAS across the state, including enacting some of those maximum contaminant levels that you were hearing about earlier. So excited to kind of provide that state level background and connection on this issue, and looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you very much. And since Halloween's coming up, we thought we'd have an invisible panelist. So Nico's been on the phone, and he's been listening to the first part of the meeting, and now we're going to have him introduce himself. Go ahead, Nico.
Hi guys, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. I can't hear you, so let me know. Good?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep, good.
Alright, awesome. So, my name's Nico. Just, you guys can call me Nico. My full name's Nicholas Gentile, but I normally just go by Nico. I actually grew up pretty close to Woodstock, not too far, on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And I did a year of college up in Albany before I moved to California, and I finished my bachelor's degree at Loyola Marymount University in environmental studies. And then I just started my PhD in environmental epidemiology at the USC Keck School of Medicine. And there I'm actually focusing my research specifically on the health effects of environmental contaminants, and specifically PFAS. So kind of, I am a little bit more connected to upstate New York though. I also worked as the director of program development for a nonprofit called the Water and Security Correction Coalition. And we work all throughout the nation, but we started in upstate New York, and our main project is called the Upstate Water Contamination Project, and has focused on different communities in upstate New York and different water contamination issues they've had. So we focused on the Adirondack region, which had road salt contamination, and have helped the community out over there doing various things. But specifically, we have worked with Posting Hill in right outside of Albany, where they actually had PFAS contamination discovered right in the water supply of their middle school, and then in some of the surrounding wells of homes around the middle school. So we worked with residents there to apply for grants and provide water testing for them. And then we also helped with, working to organize community events like breaking down complex state reports and just helping the community better understand the risks that they face. So I just wanted to be here as much as I can. I'm so sorry I'm not able to be there in person, but just to let you guys know that WIC is definitely here to help and help you guys address any of these concerns and answer any questions, and so am I. So if you guys do have any questions, we're definitely happy to work with you guys and just answer any questions and help you out.
Great. Thank you very much, Nico. So you'll be listening as we scroll through some of the questions that are in PowerPoint. But you have a copy of it. I think you won't be able to see it. Okay. And we'll be right back with. Okay, thanks. Go ahead, Chris. So, what makes PFAS of greater concern than other contaminants? Who wants to take that one? Actually, you can if you want. You want to do that? Nico?
What was that?
What makes PFAS of greater concern than other common contaminants? Okay, all right, here we go. More Nico.
Okay. All right. So PFAS are actually a really interesting chemical. I know someone had mentioned it a little bit ago, but they are. It's considered a class of over 7,000 chemicals. And as we were talking about, they are specifically man-made fluorinated chemicals. So the chemicals are made of these really strong carbon and fluorine bonds, which are actually known as the strongest bonds in chemistry, which makes them really, really hard to degrade, which is why they're used in so many industrial applications, and why they're in so many different things that we have around our house. I don't know if we have gone over, some different things that we find PFAS in, but we can find PFAS in a variety of things ranging from clothing to cosmetics to cookware to clothes packaging, etc. And that is because of this really strong chemical bond that they have. And so because of that, it also makes them really, really hard to degrade, and they become super resistant. And that is a reason why they are so present in our environment, and they stay in our bodies for a while because they're so hard to break down.
Okay, and Nico, the question was specifically about PFOS, PFOS. But your answer was still good because the things you said apply to PFOS as well. But what is there particularly about PFOS compared to some of the other compounds that would cause extra concern?
So PFOS specifically is a longer chain PFAS chemical. So PFAS are characterized by how many of these carbon fluorine bonds that they have that makes them strong. The carbon fluorine bonds are pretty much help describe the strength of the chemical. And so PFOS are specifically important, number one, because they are longer chain PFAS, so they take longer to break down. And second, because they have been used so widely in many industrial applications. They were one of the first, chemicals to become widely used. So they have actually been found more, they're one of the biggest chemicals of the family that has been used.
Great. Okay, thanks. Good answer. And next, so the next question is about PFAS behavior in the aquifer. And the first part of that question is, why do we see this behavior where we get fluctuating?
You could use the microphone.
Oh,
So people
okay.
can hear.
There you go. So why do we seem to get these fluctuating readings where we might have a high reading followed by a lower reading followed by a high reading, but nevertheless, the levels have persisted for 4 years, but jumping up and down. So that's one question about PFAS behavior. Would anyone like to take that one? Okay, Catherine.
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. We're measuring extremely low concentrations in parts per trillion. And so there's no reason to believe that it would be equally distributed in the water. So, that would be the logical explanation at this point. As if the concentrations become even greater, I would expect you would find more even distribution through time and space. But right now, we're just getting just trace amounts of it. And also, we don't know when the person is doing the sampling if they're following the protocol. I did bring some copies of papers that I believe somebody handed out. I only made 20 copies. I didn't know there would be 1 million people here. But in there, it goes through the protocol for sampling. And the person who samples is supposed to be wearing nitrile gloves. The person who's sampling is supposed to be wearing clothing that's been washed many times so that you wouldn't have fabric treatment on the clothing. And also there's other rules about where you take the sample from, the tank where you're sampling from, which I presume that would be in the pump house here in the town where they're getting the samples. So there's a lot of possibility for introduction of contamination by the sampler and the room and the things you have around you, as well as what's actually in that water. And so how you get the water into the container is important. Usually, it's my understanding that the sampling port is near the floor. So now you have a whole air above it that could possibly have stuff floating around and it could get into your container.
Yeah. So sampling inconsistencies would be
It's just,
one cause.
it's,
Okay.
it's just tricky. Yeah.
Now this is a little esoteric, but some people were interested in the temperature-dependent behavior of PFAS as it enters water, as in an aquifer. We know that it can take on a semi-solid form, but how do sort of those changes in morphology affect the way it appears down aquifer when we go to sample?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, let me see if Nico has. Nico, did you hear that one?
Can you repeat it one more time?
Yeah, so temperature-dependent behavior in water, and there's an acronym, dense non-aqueous phase liquid, which is one of the forms that several PFAS compounds can take, PFOS in particular, which is why the people that talk about trying to use pump and treat say it's very, very difficult to get to, because it'll just sort of ball up and hide in rocks or whatever. So I didn't know if you had anything you could add to that.
The PFOS specifically?
Yes.
So they do exhibit, or they can exhibit some temperature-dependent behaviors, but it's really related to their solubility. I'm not 100% familiar with the specifics of it. However, I do know that the temperature does impact how the PFOS interacts with the sediments in water bodies.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's good. And the next one is with PFAS. Well, here, I got to get back with mine. I got to drag it around. With PFAS persisting in our aquifer since 2022, what should we expect in the future, since we're still showing very similar levels to what we did back then? Anybody want to grab that one? No?
I'm happy to take a step.
Sure, let's give it, I think it's going to increase.
Yeah. I'm going to try.
Here you go.
I'm going to watch the board there.
Okay.
There we go. That'll be better. There are a number of sources of contamination for PFAS, and it is very possible that if various sources of contamination aren't addressed, that the levels of PFAS in the water could rise over time. We've seen a number of kind of classic sources of contamination across the state. They might not all apply in this case. We've seen airports, fire training facilities, landfills. These are often places where either PFAS firefighting foam was being used that leached into the groundwater, or with landfills where you have a lot of leachate leaching out of those landfills, that could be leading to contamination. But there could be other kind of point sources as well that could be contributing to PFAS in the groundwater levels. There may be, PFAS, the broader class, but PFOS specifically in your case. You may have industrial facilities nearby that may be discharging liquid waste into surface waters or groundwater that may contain PFAS. There's actually currently very little testing being done for PFAS in that industrial wastewater across the state. And so it's definitely something to look into for your community. Are there any industries in the area that may be contributing to some of that kind of wastewater contamination of your area? But this is also why kind of regular testing of both your drinking water and surrounding kind of aquifer water is so important, because it is so critical to monitor these chemicals in the long term, because the levels very well could increase going forward.
You mentioned landfills. Can you say a bit more about that?
Question was to say a little bit more about landfills, and I can say a little bit on this. Really what I'm thinking of is municipal solid waste landfills or other types of landfills. I know there's potential construction and demolition waste sites in this community. Certainly, I'm more familiar with the municipal solid waste landfills. Often what we see is that a lot of the products that enter those landfills contain PFAS chemicals. Think food packaging, think clothing, mattresses, carpet, so much of what we use in our life now has these chemicals. And as those products break down over time in those landfills, those chemicals concentrate and they form a liquid, and that becomes the leachate of that landfill. And many times that leachate is being shipped to a wastewater treatment facility somewhere, and it's being discharged back into our surface water or groundwater. And these wastewater treatment plants simply don't have the technology to remove those PFAS chemicals from the water. This has been a huge concern. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Seneca Meadows landfill out in central New York. This has been a huge issue out there, and it's still an emerging issue that New York is trying to grapple with and get a better sense of what the scale and extent of contamination that may be coming from landfills is.
Construction debris.
Everybody should know that. Okay, thank you. And the last one on this slide is what kind of responses have been most effective elsewhere? And I think I'm going to ask...
Vince, could you talk into the mic, please?
Yeah. What the last one is what kind of responses have been effective elsewhere? And I'm going to go ahead and ask Nico to weigh in because he was working on the Poisson Kill project, which is just up a little further north. So Nico, can you take that one?
Yeah, for sure. Can you guys hear me all right?
Now they can.
Okay, awesome. So honestly, it really depends on a whole variety of different characteristics, just kind of depending on, your situation. However, I will say what worked effectively in Poisson Kill was, first of all, the town coming together and realizing that there was an issue that was not being addressed, which sounds like it is being done. So kudos to you guys. And I would say the next part was really taking initiative in doing some sort of effort to help remediate the issue. So in situations like this where there is a suspected contamination source, a lot of towns and communities would work to possibly remove that contamination source. That would be their first goal, is to completely remove that contamination source, and then from them working on remediating whatever is the leftover effects of that. So working to lower the lasting effects of that source. But normally the first goal is to get that source get the contamination out of from contaminating. So that is super, I would say that's probably the most important, and one of the biggest things that have been really helpful in doing that in a lot of communities is really bringing the communities together and getting the residents passionate about doing the testing and really pushing the town to do so, because sometimes they tend to be a little bit reluctant because it does cost a lot of money. But at the end of the day, it is really important.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, next slide, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so in 2020, well, here, let me go back. In 2023, the New York DEC issued a final rule loading PFAS in groundwater to 2.7 parts per trillion. Since our water is already above 3 parts per trillion, how should town government respond?
And maybe I can take this one. So there has been a lot of action, both at the state and federal level, to start to address the PFAS contamination that's out there in our drinking water and in our environment. And one thing that I'll say to preface all of that is that the action that we have seen from the state and the federal government on this would not have been possible without communities like yours standing up, facing contamination, saying this is unacceptable, I want cleaner water, and I demand kind of accountability from those that I have elected into office. So it's phenomenal to see all of you here interested in this issue and asking questions and taking action, because that is absolutely how we've been able to win the protections against PFAS that we have in place today. And so maybe I'll walk really quickly through that kind of history of protections and how it applies to your town right now. So New York was ahead of the game on the PFAS issue, largely again because we had major contamination crises around 2015 and 2016 and amazing community organizing in places like Hoosick Falls and Newburgh to demand action. We were one of the first states in the nation to set a maximum contaminant level for 2 PFAS chemicals, PFOA and then PFOS, which you found here in your water. It took many years of advocacy, but we won those in 2020. And so those standards have been in place for just a little over 4 years now. And that is the 10 part per trillion standards that we were hearing about earlier. And essentially what that means is if a local government or a water utility detects more than 10 parts per trillion of either of those chemicals in the water, that water utility is required to take action to reduce those contamination levels. And usually that means installing filtration that will remove PFAS from the water, and there is filtration available, fortunately, that will do that. Or it means finding a new water source that isn't contaminated by these chemicals. Now, we knew even back in 2020 that the latest science was showing that there was likely no safe level of exposure to at least PFOA and PFOS, that any level of these chemicals in the water over a lifetime of exposure could lead to harmful health effects. And I think we heard a little bit about some of those harmful health effects, from thyroid disease to kidney cancer to preeclampsia, everything like that. And so we were pushing the State Department of Health and the governor to try and lower those standards below 10 parts per trillion. And it was a very difficult process. One thing that's important to keep in mind when talking about these standards, especially the drinking water standards, those maximum contaminant levels, is that kind of public health considerations and the science about what levels of exposure are potentially harmful to human health isn't the only criteria that's taken into account when setting that standard. There's technological feasibility that goes into that. There's also economic considerations about what the state thinks this is going to cost local governments to install new treatment technology or to clean up the water. And so really, every time we try and set a new standard, it is in some ways a political fight to make sure that that standard is as strong and health protective as possible. As we were trying to get New York to strengthen our PFAS drinking water standards, luckily the Biden administration and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency stepped in. There has been a lot of PFAS contamination happening across the country, a lot of amazing organizing happening in states like New Hampshire and Michigan. And the Biden administration just this past March finalized the first ever federal PFAS drinking water standards. The first drinking water standards, honestly, on any chemical in almost 20 years, I think. It was a real landmark decision that happened in March. Those drinking water standards are stronger and more health protective than we have in New York right now. For PFOA and PFOS, those 2 chemicals that we currently regulate, the EPA set those standards at 4 parts per trillion. So that's where that level comes from that we were talking about earlier. So that means when those standards go into effect, anytime a water utility detects above that level, they have to treat or they have to find a new water source. Unfortunately, those standards will take a number of years to go into effect. Water utilities get 3 years to do their initial round of testing, and then an additional 2 years to install treatment technology if they have levels above that 4 part per trillion limit for PFOA or PFOS. So it could be quite some time before many communities see cleaner water as a result of those standards. And that's why we think communities can be taking kind of a twofold approach when they're detecting PFAS in their drinking water at this stage. If you're coming close to that 4 part per trillion level, that doesn't mean that you have to wait before you're above 4 parts per trillion to take action. We've seen water utilities in other parts of the state that are being proactive in installing treatment technology even when they're not hitting the current 10 part per trillion standards, because they're getting close to that level. They know they're likely to go over, and it's a more kind of protective of public health and clean drinking water to get that filtration in place now rather than later. So wanted to kind of make the point that there is nothing legally stopping your town from doing something to address PFAS in your drinking water. They're just not currently required to do anything about it at the moment. The other thing that can be done as a community, this is looking more towards the state level, is that you can be pushing the State Department of Health and Governor Hochul to implement those stronger 4 part per trillion standards faster than EPA is doing right now. There is a state drinking water quality council that we often advocate before, and we can definitely keep folks in the loop when that happens, because the more folks showing up to those meetings and telling the State Department of Health we need to move faster and act more quickly on PFAS, the more pressure that they'll actually feel to do so. So that I think provides a little bit of background and context on those drinking water standards.
Thanks. Good. Okay, so this is just sort of, Catherine?
I wanted to ask a question.
Oh, sure.
The filtration, now would that be like using carbon?
There are a number of treatment technologies that can remove PFAS from drinking water. Granulated activated carbon, also known as GAC filtration, is the most frequent and common that we've seen used across the state. There are a couple of other technologies as well. Reverse osmosis has been very effective at removing PFAS, as has a technology known as ion exchange, which is where you try and kind of break up the PFAS molecules by trying to dislodge their component parts. So luckily there is technology out there that can be used to get these chemicals out of the water.
Okay. Alrighty. So this is just sort of a reference slide. We may come back to it later, but you all heard Chris and Stephanie talk about how the rates have been progressing through the past few years. So you see 21, there was no technical level. And then as it progressed, 22, 23, and then there were 2 tests this year. And the last of those tests came in at 3.16 parts per trillion. For our panel, what does it take to identify the source of contamination, and who should initiate this effort? I might put that one to Nico, just because he recently worked on the post-control project. So Nico, I'm putting you on. I'm not certain if there was source identification involved, but if not, you can just bow out. But you have the floor.
Yeah, so we did do a little bit of work with the data that the DEC collected and mapping it on GIS, so the community could better understand where the contamination was located and kind of where it was found in the heaviest levels versus like lighter. However, ideally, what you want to do when you're doing identification for PFAS contamination sources is doing a variety of different testing. So starting with water sampling and analysis, and normally this is what the DEC would do. So they would go in and do different water tests at different levels and soil tests. So they would take samples at different depths, analyze these samples, and then what they would do is use mapping and tracing to create a inspection or an overview of the site and what the possible contamination would look like, dependent on a bunch of different things. So they analyzed groundwater flow models, and they use historical data, and they do chemical fingerprinting, and then what the end goal is ideally to identify like what the main source is. So it will lead you to what is where the PFAS are coming from.
We might think of those as hotspots. I had a look at excuse me for just a second. I had a look at the map they created. I wish we had it up here, but it was a GIS map where there were different sized circles all over the map that showed the different concentrations of PFOA and PFOS. And I believe even though the water level was only a few parts per trillion, what was the highest of the ground samples you took?
One of the samples came back at around 20 parts per trillion.
Yeah.
Really high. Yeah, so the mapping was done. So we took all of the tests that the DEC had done and published online. They published all the data, but it was in super confusing tables and wasn't really easy to read or understand. So we took it and we put it into mapping software to actually show where the extent of the contamination was located, where the contamination was the highest, and then kind of where it was the lowest in the gradient of the contamination. And that kind of allowed community members to assess whether they should be worried about the contamination if it was in their water. And in this sense, it was for people living around wherever this site was, and they were worried about their well water being impacted. And they were on private wells, so a little bit different than I think a lot of the residents in Woodstock.
Okay, good, thanks. Did you
Second
guys
part.
have?
Second part.
Yeah, who does this?
Who should initiate?
Yeah, so who should initiate that effort?
So normally it's the DEC. The DEC, normally when the state gets a complaint of some sort of contamination or PFAS contamination, they have a responsibility to what's it called, to go check it out, to assess it. And so it would normally be them who goes out, who does the testing, and it's an expensive process to do all the testing and the mapping. In some cases where, there isn't enough attention and it's a small source contamination site, you have examples like NGOs and nonprofits, for example. Something that WIC could possibly do is you would apply for grants and get the money, and then the town with the residents would organize it and put it together. However, it's a little less accurate and, is not as probably great as what the DEC would do. However, it would do the job in the lack of there being some sort of management for an issue like this.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with the understanding that none of us can be considered safe from PFAS consumption, what extra precautions should be taken for women of childbearing age and young children? Anybody have an answer for that? Let's ask our epidemiologist. He might.
I think Robert can answer.
Robert wants to answer that.
Just a couple things to mention on that point. One is, I think there can oftentimes be a desire to shift to bottled water after PFAS are found in the drinking water. I think in a lot of cases that's not actually advisable. There are fewer protections against PFAS for bottled water than there is for public drinking water. And it is very possible that there may be contamination in that bottled water as well. If there's a pregnant woman or someone who's immunocompromised and you really want to make sure that you're getting PFAS out of the water in your house, probably installing some kind of in-house filtration is the best way to go, especially say if you're on a private well. You can get GAC or reverse osmosis filters that will remove that from your individual water. But I know sometimes bottled water comes up in these kind of conversations, but especially when we're dealing with relatively low levels of PFAS, as we are here in Woodstock, it's really, I don't think, a very good option.
You're saying like Poland Spring could have more?
Exactly, yeah. There are no actual PFAS standards that they have to adhere to when they're bottling their water. Yeah.
Yeah, well,
I also have a comment.
Okay, go ahead. Go
And
ahead.
I recommended this before when I spoke here, that my feeling is that you could buy a distillation unit for about $100. You could take your water, put it in the distillation unit, and distill it. So what happens is the water is boiled, and then it condenses and drains into a container, and then you could drink that water. And in the distillation process, the PFAS wouldn't be passed through. You would just get the condensation of the water into the bucket that you would then drink out of. And I think that's probably the safest thing, better than buying distilled water, because you don't know what might possibly be in the distilled water you might buy at the grocery store.
It's in plastic too.
And that's the other problem, is you need probably a glass container or a stainless steel container for the distilled water to go into. And most of the distillation units come with a plastic bottle. But that's simple enough to fix that. Use stainless steel or glass. But I think that's what I would recommend. But then you still have the problem of bathing. And that's the worst, because that's what you need a lot of water for. And I don't know the easy answer to that. We all do good with our washcloths when we have to, but, there's nothing like a shower. I have to say, I have 1 part per trillion of, I don't remember which chemical in my water. And it's about time to sample again, because it's been like 3 years since I sampled. I'll also point out that the DEC isn't doing you any favors. Every single brownfield site in this state, every single spill at a gas station at this site, the people who own those have had to pay for their consultants to go out and take at least 4 or 5 samples from the monitoring wells and have them sampled for the PFAS compounds. So DEC has pushed it on to the people where there are known contamination sites and not done it themselves. And I work for a lot of these people. I feel bad that they have to pay the money. It's not cheap to do PFAS sampling. It's expensive. I don't remember now what it costs, like probably $400 a sample, something like that. And whereas when you do volatile organics, the stuff you have, like gasoline, that's like $100 a sample. So it is significantly more money, and it's, all of that is put on the owners of where you've got other contaminants, usually like dry cleaning materials or other types of industrial chemicals. And I don't think they're gonna run out here and be any help to us. They're gonna be just as much help here as they've been with 10 Church Street, where the C&D landfill problem is.
Thanks, Catherine. All right, so I think I heard that as far as water treatment goes, you have a choice between distillation, reverse osmosis, ion exchange, and GAC, granulated activated carbon. Those are the basic methods, but this water filtration device, for example, is at Zero Water, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Yeah, and they actually advertise that they minimize PFAS contaminants.
There are some that advertise 99 or 100%.
Yeah, exactly. So you can find
But look-
products that will at least make that claim. I don't know how they're regulated.
But look for that phrase, and if you're shopping.
Yeah. Okay. Current literature suggests significant dermal absorption of PFAS compounds can occur. Is it safe to wash and or bathe at our current PFAS levels? You want to take that?
I think pretty confidently yes. I think dermal absorption can probably happen, but really where we have seen the greatest source of kind of PFAS contribution to our bodies and to our bloodstream, it's coming from drinking water, or it's coming from kind of nearby industrial sites where there's some other kind of major source of exposure. From the literature I've seen, and EPA kind of backs this up in the drinking water standards that it has set, dermal absorption isn't of too great a concern with these chemicals, I think especially at the levels currently being detected in Woodstock's water.
There's also stuff about the pregnancy thing.
Oh, okay, sure. And here's Nico. All right, go ahead, Nico.
Okay, hi. So I just wanted to add a couple things about the possible interventions to take if you are pregnant or a child. I think the first recommendation of using filtered water is the best. It has definitely been proven that bottled water does have less regulations of PFAS chemicals than even our regular tap water does. So the best way is to get a filter, and there are very easy and cheap filters that you can actually get, almost like a Brita, but Britas don't filter out PFAS. But there are some other types of filters similar to Britas that do that. That have been proven to filter out a good amount, in addition to the ones that can connect to your sink. However, I do want to mention that there is other ways of exposure, and also ways to expose your children. And so I do want to mention that it isn't also important to limit PFAS-containing products when you're pregnant or breastfeeding. And that includes nonstick cookware or using stain-resistant fabrics or certain food packaging. And the reason for that is because they do contain PFAS. And one of the biggest things to also think about is even if you are limiting your PFAS exposure in the short term, there is a really long half-life for PFAS. And a half-life means the amount of time that it takes your body to break down half the amount of the chemical. And for most of PFAS chemicals, including PFOS, the half-life is around 5 to 7 years. So PFAS that you could have ingested 7 years ago could still be in your body, and therefore be impacting any children. And what the literature is saying is one of the only ways to actually remove PFAS from your body before the end of this half-life is through breastfeeding and passing it on to your children. So it's really important also as a new mother to go get tested for PFAS and to get your blood tested, so you know how much PFAS it might be in your body, and so you're not potentially exposing a child through breastfeeding.
Okay, thank you, Nico.
And then dermal absorption, I will say, is
Oh, hang on. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, I will say the last about dermal absorption is, I do agree in the sense that the biggest exposure is through ingestion. That is how you guys are going to be most exposed to PFAS. When you're showering, when, you know, at a level of 3 parts per trillion, you're at a pretty low risk for dermal absorption. However, just when you're a vulnerable population, such as someone who is immune compromised or pregnant or a child, you might want to just take extra risks. Maybe not taking extended and really long showers or bathing for a long period of time. Maybe just be a little bit more aware of your use of water and the water that you're using. But at 3 parts per trillion, dermal absorption isn't necessarily going to be your biggest concern.
Okay, thanks.
It's up there.
No, that's left.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just seeing the wheel. There we go.
Okay. So, one of the big questions of the evening is, there's one most obvious source of PFAS that's in direct communication with our aquifer area, and that is 10 Church Road. The HydroQuest report, which Catherine Weinkaufner worked on, as well as Paul Rubin, was given to the town supervisor and the DEC and indicated that groundwater contamination from the dump to the water supply was inevitable. It was just a matter of when. So how do we identify whether this is at least one of the current sources? That's one of 2 questions. Anybody want to grab that?
There's source testing.
The people who live there, who have the well right there where the C&D has been deposited, sampling of their well is critical. And I don't know if there has been any more recent sampling or not, since we looked at it last time. I don't know, John Conrad, do you know if they've done any more sampling?
I'm not in a position to comment on it tonight.
Okay. But that's critical, because they're at the site where we think the potential contamination could be coming from.
Is anyone in the room aware of any sampling from either the Amy's or any of the other Reynolds Roads occupants? No. That's something that we're looking forward to doing, but we'll touch on that later, is getting some of those samples out of the way. And then the other question is, does normal pumping for the Woodstock well fields is 44,000 gallons per day? And the question is there a likelihood that will increase the rate at which contaminants are being pulled down grade from Shady?
Definitely.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit more about that, Catherine?
Well, let's see, when you have a well and you're busy pumping, there's this cone of depression that builds up around your well. And so the longer you pump, the bigger the cone of depression, and it reaches out and pulls in the water. So normally you're pulling water probably from 360 degrees around the well. So a certain amount is going to come from 10 Church Street, and it may take, maybe there already, or it might take a couple of years to get there. But it's not that far. I don't know the actual mileage distance, but sooner or later, if PFAS is actually at 10 Church Street, it's going to be in, more is going to be found in the Woodstock water supply wells.
Okay. Now, you guys don't have to read all this. We just wanted you to know it's there. There is a Woodstock town law that prevents what occurred, would have prevented what occurred at Shady if it were enforced. We don't understand why this law was not invoked when the town took the people who put the dump there to court and won a judgment against them. There was no effort to remove the entire burden of soil that was put in there, which was about 200 truckloads. So this is the law that we as private citizens should be relying upon to force the cleanup of areas that are sitting directly over our aquifer and have the potential to pollute our aquifer with forever chemicals. So yeah, we can put that one up later if anybody wants to read it.
Yeah, but
Just
the law has
one
failed
sentence.
us. That law has failed
Okay.
us.
So since the unpermitted toxic dump in Shady violates both town and state law, who can we look to for assistance in the absence of an appropriate local response? Somehow, Rob, I thought you'd like that.
You know, sadly, my expertise is not on kind of the legality of dumping operations, so I don't know how much detail I have to add on this. You know, there is an oversight role that the state does play with permitting a lot of this stuff, and so anything that you can leverage in that permitting process that may or may not happen going forward is definitely an option here. But it can be really tough to get, especially state agencies, kind of on your side or dedicating resources or time and attention to your community because they're facing a number of priorities elsewhere in the state. And so really kind of comes down to local organizing and advocacy to build that political power that you'll need.
Okay, thanks. Well, let me check with Nico. Nico, I don't know if you have anything to add to that. You want me to read that?
I think he answered your question.
Okay, good. All right, good. Next slide.
Let me just point out that we did have a meeting with DEC. I attended, the supervisor of the town of Woodstock attended, and several other citizens. And the main thing we asked at the end of the meeting, because the woman who's in charge of DEC Region 3 in New Paltz wasn't any help at all. And the one thing we asked to get would be if we could clean up 10 Church Street, take the materials away from there that were dumped there, where should it go? That was the only thing we asked for a response. I gave them my email because they asked for it. I never got a response from them. They have never told us what site this material could be taken to get it out of our town. So the DEC has failed us. Your supervisor has failed us. I have no clue where we could go next to try to get anything done. It's going to be expensive. If there were 200 truckloads of stuff that went there, and I guess they took out some of the large pieces of C&D, but it's the fine material that the water infiltrates through and will pick up contaminants and move it on down through the subsurface into the aquifer.
Which was just spread all around the...
Which they just spread it around because of the, whatever his name, the guy that got sentenced today in the newspaper. Had shoved it right up against the Ammonese property. And so, of course, it was going to affect their well because their well was right there. But, the one thing we asked for, where could this stuff go? Where is a permitted facility that we could legally ship it to?
So still waiting for an answer on that one.
But there was a court case that required them to clean up a number of sites, but Woodstock was not part of that legal action.
Yeah, actually, Catherine, that would be interesting to know where DEC is directing the people that are supposed to be cleaning up the other sites, where they're taking the stuff. We'll try to find that.
That must be the stuff over by Socrates where the same guy had stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's all
The stuff that was
Corollas.
by Socrates?
Yeah, it's all Joseph Corollas is the source of material.
Right.
Okay, so a little slightly different topic, but Woodstock has something called Wellhead Protection Plan, which was finally put into law in 2022, and it's intended to keep activities that would cause pollution to the aquifer from occurring. In other words, when you go to zone a car wash, you won't get a permit because you're sitting over the aquifer in Bearsville, which incidentally is only 20 feet deep. If you want to know how vulnerable our aquifer is, that should give you a pretty good idea because that's a residential area. There is no interceptor line for Woodstock's wastewater treatment plant, so everyone in that neighborhood has septic tanks. So if we want to protect our water supply, I think we have a lot of work left to do. But the question that was burning in my mind when I reviewed this wellhead protection plan is why, originally it included the Saukville Aquifer, because the upper Saukville Aquifer is what feeds Bearsville Flats, which is relatively flat. Saukville, of course, being elevated, has a large, long aquifer that extends from just above Shady all the way down into Bearsville, and then, of course, continues at the Saukville. But why was that eliminated from our wellhead protection plan when it is the primary source of water? And if the protection plan would have included that area, I doubt that anyone would have given these guys a permit for an illegal dump right over the top of the aquifer. So that was one question. Why was it eliminated? I don't know if there's anyone in the room that can answer it. And then the second question is, should...
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Laura. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I am Laura Rickey, I am a member of the town board, and I was heavily involved in that law. As you said, it at one point had those extra areas in, and the difficulty of getting it passed, we got past what we could, and you're raising a good point. We should perhaps go back and look at reinstituting that. But at the time, it looked like we had opposition to passing it with that extra area, so we passed what we could over the aquifer.
Okay, thanks for letting us know the process. But what do you recall what the arguments were against including it?
Well, that was several years ago. I mean, it went through different boards, you know, the zoning revision committee, of which I'm a chair of. We worked it, and then as we sent it out to the different boards, we got some pushback. And I don't recall the details of what, where, and when. But it's a valid question of, is it a good time to go back and re-look at that? The other thing I'd like to say is, well, I'll turn around, if I may. The other thing I'd like to say is I am on a committee. It's called the Drinking Water Source Protection Plan. And so I've been on this with Arlene Weissman and Julia Blelock, who were both members of the Woodstock Environmental Commission some years ago. And the three of us are meeting with New York State people. Again, it's called the Drinking Water Source Protection Plan. And we are focused on Woodstock's drinking water, the aquifer. And in this, we are focused on the water that leads into it. So right now, I am active with New York State. We have monthly meetings, and we've been meeting, I'm guessing 6 months or so, and we may have another 6 months to go. But it is a focus specifically on drinking water source protection, and it is focused with New York State experts. I believe it's Department of Health in New York State. So there are experts in New York State that I am working with to try to get their answers on what we should do next.
Yeah,
So
it's taking too long.
So Laura,
I agree. But
can I take from that there's a possibility that when you guys are done with the drinking water source protection program, a recommendation could come back to the town to include Shady and source protection?
Well, we have specifically asked, everything's political, but Arlene, Julia, and I have specifically clearly asked that the drinking water source protection plan, that this activity that we're working on, that it include 10 Church Road, and the Department of Health at New York State level. At the last meeting, they said, well, we have to go to the DEC, we don't want to step on toes. It is what it is.
Okay.
So I was very clear that if we get an answer that they feel like they can't include specifically 10 Church Road, that I'm going to start escalating as best I can, because that's kind of the whole point of us saying, hey, let's look at the drinking water. We want the experts to tell us whether or not they believe there's an issue.
Laura, sorry, at a town board meeting in 2020, on the 20th of October, you agreed with hydrologist Jim McIver, and you said it actually 4 times, that you want all that stuff taken out, that you want all that stuff, referring to the construction debris at 10 Church Road. You said you want it all taken out of there. You said you didn't want it tested, you just wanted the 200 truckloads removed immediately. Do you remember saying that? And my question is, at what stage after that meeting in October 2020 did you decide not to do that?
There were, everybody's going to disagree with this, I'm sure, but there were experts that took it and went further, and I understand that the solution that was implemented is not, we're all here because people aren't happy with the solution that was implemented.
It was illegal.
I get that the solution
was illegal.
The solution implemented was not you know, people aren't happy with it. But in any event, there
Just say it
were,
out loud.
Say it was illegal.
The Supreme Court invalidated the permit for crying out loud.
It was a gimmick.
well, okay, so we're going
And the
into.
town board, 2 members of the town board wrote a letter to the Attorney General and stated that they believe that material is going to be a big problem, that the fine material as well as the large pieces are contaminated. We know it came from Joe Carolus, from his facilities that the DEC shut down for being contaminated. Just say the permit was illegal.
Well, I'm not getting involved in that. What I will get involved in.
Oh, yeah, right.
Sit down then.
Then there was
No.
just, wait a minute, there was just a proposal to clean up Shady and you voted against it.
Why did you vote against that, Laura?
Well, okay, there's a lot of stuff that went.
EPA.
There's a lot of stuff that went on, and there was an illegal proposal, and I voted against the illegal proposal. You are correct. I did vote against an illegal proposal. But in any event, we're getting.
What do you call an illegal proposal?
I'm not digging up history. I'd have to go look at the exact words
Is
of
that
the
Plan
resolution.
E?
Excuse me?
Was that Plan E?
What are you referring to as illegal?
Well, there was a resolution of which three people voted yes, 2 people voted no. You're correct, I did vote no, because I believed it to be illegal. So, but I don't have the resolution in front of me to tell you
But
specifically.
what changed your mind from 2020 when you said it all must go? You said all that junk at 10 Church Road, referring to the 200 truckloads, must go now. You said don't test it, just get it. You said I want to see it out of there.
And New York State said,
So hold on, let Laura answer the question. What changed your mind?
It was getting handled, I believed it was handled okay. I was not, you know, everybody on the town board doesn't all work on the same thing. I'm working on the things I'm working on. I believe that was being.
How could it be handled okay when they didn't even, nobody saw even 1 truckload removed, and you wanted it all removed?
No, there was a lot removed. I was up
There
there.
was 4 loads removed.
I was up there and I did see, and I know as we all agree, the big chunks went out. I know, I'm hearing people say, yes, the little stuff is still a problem.
Did you see the big chunks go out?
I saw the
Where
big
did
chunks
they go?
in a pile. I was not there every day to watch it leave, but I saw the separation. I saw the big
And where
chunks.
did it go? Where did it
I do
go?
not know.
Do you not think as a responsible member of the town board, you should know where that contaminated waste went?
Again, my responsibilities were not that. There were others who were responsible for that. Not everybody on the board
No one
does
was
everything.
responsible
It is
for it.
what it is.
Let's
So,
get
but I am again working on the drinking water source protection
Okay, we move
plan,
on.
specifically to 10 Church Road.
Okay,
Can I
moving on.
ask one additional question? Am I correct, Laura, that the program you're working on regarding the drinking water is an 18-month program where they're working on, that this organization is looking into it, you're the liaison towards it, but the organization is actually doing the work, is evaluating a broad variety of issues, and they're just going to give, at the end of this very lengthy period of time, and I'm welcoming their input, but they're going to give recommendations to the town board. In the meantime, we know right now we have PFAS levels that have contaminated our water, and nothing is being done. Not filtration, and not looking for the source of that contamination.
What are the levels?
Am I correct about that? Oh, okay.
Sorry, yeah.
Well, I mean, really, I'm looking at the source of it with the drinking water source protection plan.
But they're going to give recommendations to the town board. They're not source testing, am I correct? And they're going to give recommendations to the town board about a variety of issues regarding our drinking water. And that's going to come at the end of an 18-month analysis.
Yeah,
And in the meantime, our PFAS remains and is rising in our water.
well, I do know that it's being tested regularly by the water department, and the testing and the amount does fluctuate, as was said here. The amounts do fluctuate over time, so it is being tested and decisions will be made as we see what comes.
Yes,
in
and
the
we have
testing.
contaminants in our water. The testing has borne that out. And so at this point, okay.
Okay, we're going to move on because
Could I just ask a quick question? Would you, Laura, the name of your committee?
I'm sorry, I had somebody talking about yours. Say again.
I apologize. What is the name of your committee that you named? I have not heard of this.
Yeah,
in any of our-
it's a New York State program that we applied to get accepted into, and it is a drinking water source protection program. They call it DWSP2. Drinking Water Source Protection Program. Is a New York State level program that Woodstock applied to and got accepted so that we would get this help from New York State.
I just haven't heard of any of this in any of our town meetings?
Well, because we're still working on it, we didn't have a result to bring back yet, because we're still working on it.
But shouldn't the public have been informed?
It's an 18-month program, which is basically a study. So most studies aren't going to report anything unless they have a plan for annual reporting, which DWSPP does not. Okay, so just to orient you, this is a terrible map. I know nobody can see it. It's a little bit of an eye chart. But just to give you an idea, Shady is up here, so that's where the dump is. That's also the beginning of the aquifer that runs all the way down alongside Sawkill Creek into this Bearsville Flats area. And this area here, there's 5 wells there and 2 wells right there. And this is relatively flat. It just sort of pools off like a big underground lagoon. But it is primarily fed from the underground aquifer coming from Shady down to there. So when you hear us referring to Shady being connected to our well fields, that's where that's coming from. And the next slide is just a close-up of the well fields itself. So this is the bottom of the drawing we were just looking at, and that is where the source protection plan is, and the overlay prevents anybody from getting permitted to do something that would be a destructive activity to the water supply, but it does not include this entire upper area. It's just where you see the yellow line there.
Those are the 7 wells, the circles?
Yeah, those were the 7 wells with the little dots. Now, we're not going to do this one yet, because now we're going to open it up to you guys. I know some of you signed up to speak. And you want to call whoever's on the list first?
Yeah, the first person is Chris W.
Chris W.
Do we want to turn the lights on now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, let's turn the lights on. Thank you.
Yeah, just come up to the microphone.
I just have like 2 or 3 really quick things, and I'm sorry.
Okay, that's cool.
They're not. It might be because I came like 6 minutes late, but
Just get close to the mic.
we've been saying PFOS and PFAS all night, and they've been very interchangeable. I'm sure they're not. And maybe you guys opened with that, and I missed it in the first 2 minutes, but is one a subclass of the other? Is that?
That's correct. Yeah, that was our first slide.
Yeah, sorry, I'm sorry.
No, it's a good topic to recover. So yes, PFAS, this is PFAS. This is the class of chemicals that we're talking about. This is the 5,000 to 10,000 chemicals that industry has been putting in products for decades now. PFOS is the specific PFAS chemical that's been detected in Woodstock's drinking water. This is one of the most common of the PFAS chemicals. It's one of the ones whose health effects have been most studied. And so yeah, that's the distinction there.
Got it, thank you. And then is there any home test that's economical that people can do to see the results out of their tap?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Honestly, there oftentimes aren't tests at like Home Depot or Lowe's that you can get for PFAS. What you can do is that there is a list of approved labs through the State Department of Health, their Environmental Laboratory Approval Program. These are all the labs that DOH feels confident in running tests and analyzing results, that you can feel pretty confident about the results that you're getting. Some of those labs may offer testing to private individuals as well, either those just in their home or those with private wells.
And Nico's going to weigh in a little too on the question about test kits. Hang on.
There's a website, again, just to follow up on that, there's a website, if you Google Environmental Laboratory Approval Program, there's a DOH website that will list all of these approved labs. I think you can search for PFAS chemicals, and that list should show up.
What's it called?
Okay.
It's the Environmental Laboratory Approval Program, also known as the ELAP program, and should be found through the State Department of Health website.
And Nico can inform us about a test kit that I just bought one recently. Go ahead, Nico.
Yeah, so a lot of the communities, especially when we do studies and stuff, when we're working with people who might live in different areas and we need to collect samples, they do somewhat economically affordable test kits that you can order online. 2 of the websites I would recommend. One is for water sampling, and that would be CycloPure, CYCLOPURE. And they just do little kits that they actually send to your house. You collect the samples following the directions, and then you can send it right back to them. And they'll actually analyze your water for over 70 PFAS contaminants. And then another one that has recently come up that's really great is blood testing for PFAS. So they actually take a finger prick of blood and can measure the PFAS of over 40, the contaminant levels of over 40 PFAS contaminants in your blood, and that's just from like a finger prick, and that's through Eurofins, EUROFINS.
Do that again.
And so both of those are good, pretty available, and somewhat economically feasible tests that you guys can just order to your houses if you do.
We'll make sure that this information gets onto our website.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. We'll put it on our Facebook page and our website.
This video will be shown tonight on YouTube.
Okay, so now our next, who's next on your list?
Rebecca's it.
Rebecca?
Yeah, so I
Please come up to the mic.
I have a big voice, everybody can hear me. We know this. Mine, I'm unsure if you can answer my questions. I haven't been able to find any answers on this. Should people who live closer to the wellheads be more concerned about higher concentrations that they could be getting? Those people that live, anybody that lives in Bearsville Flats, we know when your water's getting chlorinated. You don't know it in town, but I can't take a shower for probably 3 days at my house because there's so much chlorine. It's something I learned to live with. I also filter water in my house. When it comes to looking at this, have sites decided to, rather than just continuously testing, start to forego those thought processes and immediately start filtering the water at the source, like at the wellheads? Do they have filtering systems for those? That I don't know.
Actually, we have looked into one, and it's about $10,000 a month. They bring it in on a big truck. It's actually a gigantic bed of granulated activated carbon.
It's not, it's 10,000 a month?
10,000 a month, yeah.
And then the last question I have, which pertains, I think, less to this and more about Tenchurch Road. Often we hear this conversation, and I have mulled this over in my head a lot, why we didn't just remove it to begin with. I'm still not clear. But what I'm wondering is, if I've looked around trying to go, well, where are they sending contaminated debris? And it's not that easy to find areas where it's going to be sent, or it's going to be sent to be other problems. Is there any treatment that can be done? I'm making it up. The town pulls out 200 truckloads of it. Is there a way that the town can treat that debris and then place it someplace? I don't know the answers to those questions.
And I think I can answer at least one of them. The construction and debris treatment question is kind of outside of my area of expertise, so I can turn to others on that. But in terms of the question about where you're located next to the well field and whether that's going to affect the levels of PFAS in your drinking water, if you're on the town water, it shouldn't matter where you're located. You're going to be having the same levels in your water as everybody else, because once it flows into the distribution system, that's not where it's picking up the PFAS, and it doesn't kind of degrade the farther away it goes, so you're going to find those similar levels. And maybe one other piece that I'll mention on this before turning to others for possibly other parts of your question is really want to stress here the importance of more private well testing. I know there's a lot of folks on town water district water right now, but there's likely a lot of other folks in the surrounding communities, a part of the aquifer, that are on those private wells, and there's probably been very little testing, I would imagine, so far for PFAS. Not only is it good to do that testing to help them find out what's in their water, but it also can give you a better sense about where might that source be coming from and what levels are showing up in kind of different parts of your area. That's oftentimes how local governments have kind of justified the public benefit of doing that testing. You do have some private benefit for doing this testing for the homeowners, but it really gives the town and the community a much better sense of what are the PFAS levels that we're seeing in the broader geographic area.
So Rob, let me just confirm with you. So here again is the Sawkill Creek, which has the aquifer right along it. So private wells beginning here at the beginning of the aquifer and running all the way down the Sawkill Valley in here, you're saying they in particular should be testing their wells?
I think so, yeah. I mean, if nothing else, it's a good data point about, are we seeing contamination further afield? Or, might that be kind of where some of the contamination might be coming from? More private well testing is never a bad thing and really helps kind of give you a better sense of those data points.
Great, thank you.
Do we collect that data? If people do it?
What's that?
If people do it, maybe they could get in touch with us and we could collect some of that data.
Yeah, that's something we want to do.
Paul is up next.
Paul. Our guest of honor.
Well, Paul's coming up. If anybody does private well testing, you can get in touch with our citizens group, Woodstockers United for Change. We'll start to, keep that data and see where it leads us if we get enough data points.
I just, for context, I would like to know, what were the PFAS levels in Hoosick Falls and Newburgh and stuff that kicked this whole thing off? What were they like?
Yeah. So they were detecting PFAS levels much, much higher than you're currently detecting right now. They were in the hundreds of parts per trillion. I think in Hoosick Falls it was around 300 parts per trillion, I think. And that was just in the drinking water. There was environmental contamination where the PFAS levels got into the thousands of parts per trillion. So that's where you have a really acute human health crisis, where there were orders put down from EPA that residents there needed to stop drinking the water immediately. Luckily, Woodstock is not anywhere close to that at the moment, which is a very good thing. And hopefully by trying to address any sources of contamination that are out there, that never happens here or anywhere else across the state.
And also, if you cook with Teflon, aren't you getting plenty of PFAS consuming?
It all depends on the material that cookware is made out of. So, especially up until the 2000s, most cookware had, non-stick cookware had PFOA and PFOS in that cookware. And yes, that was a major source of exposure for a lot of people. A lot of cookware companies have said that they've quote-unquote phased out PFAS chemicals. What that means is that they've substituted one PFAS chemical for another. So they have stopped using PFOA and PFOS, and they've started putting in place PFBA and there's 7,000 of them, we could go on.
Say it, yes.
Yeah. And this is why at the state level there's been a big push to try and ban the entire class of PFAS chemicals from a lot of these consumer products where there are non-PFAS alternatives on the market. So at the state level we've banned PFAS in firefighting foam, in food packaging, in clothing, but there are still a lot more products that we need to ban them in, and actually cookware is still one of them. There's legislation before New York right now that would ban those chemicals in products, and it's something we are hoping to pass when the legislature reconvenes in January.
And what I wanted to say was that I don't know a whole lot about this. I'm not studied on the whole, blow by blow. But it did seem like DEC badly dropped the ball on looking at the site, and Anula Curtis has reached out to the Attorney General's office, and the Attorney General's office has put the DEC on notice regarding the church road site. And I don't know exactly how it proceeds from there, but the Attorney General's office, the District James office, is involved in the church road thing.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. Who's next? Oh, Randall.
Do I have to come all over here?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Good to see you, Randall. How you doing?
My question is while Dr. Kathy is here.
Could you get closer to the mic, please?
Dr. Kathy, you and my dear friend and colleague Paul Rubin opined a long time ago. So could we clarify one thing for Laura, because she's here and she's very interested. So Plan E apparently consisted of sorting and sifting, we're told. Plan E moved around the fines, and apparently 1 or 2 or 4 truckloads may have gone somewhere with chunks. So one problem we have is perfectly obvious. even though DEC ordered Carolus to remove material from several Saugerty sites, is it not true, the question was earlier asked in this forum, where are the approved sites? Well, who, above all else, would know where the licensed disposal sites are, because Region 3 ordered Carolus to take the material away from his sites that was brought upstate illegally by the waste haulers who were being sued by the Attorney General. So because you possess a body of expertise, your expertise does not need to encompass the actual licensed sites, but as a matter of common sense, somebody said DEC dropped the ball. So as a matter of common sense, if they ordered the removal but did not require Carolus to report every load that purportedly left his sites, when, where, and how, and where it ended up, I know you're a hydrogeologist, you're not a C&D disposal specialist, but I'm just asking you, as a matter of common sense, wasn't DEC primarily responsible for receiving the report from the offender that the material had ended up at a licensed site?
Well, I would think so.
Okay. So,
They have never demonstrated that that was so.
So then we have the question of a letter from District Administrator, EPA Region 3 Administrator Turturro, that says there's nothing there. Now, that letter has been used for various purposes. Now, a couple of Laura's colleagues, the supervisor, and Anula Curtis, and an acting head of the Woodstock Environmental Commission have said to the Attorney General, we are told, and it's been reported in the press, that the Supreme Court case ascertained by virtue of testimony given by Carolus, the person who's responsible for this plague of contaminated C&D getting to our county in the first place. So we're told in a published report, and Laura's here, this is a public discourse. So the supervisor, her colleague, Anula Curtis, is kind of on this case. And, excuse me, let me turn this off. This letter has gone to the Attorney General, and so we have a contradiction in terms between Region 3 saying you don't have a C&D problem there because the only evidence that would qualify this as a C&D, an illegal or an improper C&D disposal site, is what we might call the lumps and the chunks. That's what her letter says. So, just so we can clear this up, at some place along the way, a so-called Plan E was put into place, and that was the sort and sift. So could you let us know once and for all, if the chunks were taken away and the fines were moved to a place where they would accumulate water and it would go down by virtue of the force of gravity, are those fines potentially, because you're a hydrogeologist, are those fines that were actually moved illegally around the site, according to Plan E, and left on the site, and presumably every time there's snow or rain, such parts of those fines as are subject to that movement of water, is there any way to call that a cleanup? When the fines were left there?
Yeah, Paul Rubin and I both agree that removing the C&D meant removing the large pieces that you could identify. This is a rock. This is a piece of metal, or this is a brick. or this is some other construction and demolition debris, something that came from tearing down a building or some other structure. So those would be the large pieces that you could look at and say, oh yeah, I know what that is. Oh, look at that, there's some wire, blah, 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 blah. All the stuff you could identify. And if they took that away, they would be getting rid of the C&D, but the problem is that what came with it was a lot of fine material. And it's the fine material that we don't know what it's composed of, but it's spread all around, and when it rains and when the snow is melting, it can carry little bits of that away, or it can dissolve it and move it down into the groundwater, and that's our concern. We're much more worried about the fine materials than we were ever concerned about the big stuff. But we couldn't even get DEC to tell us where anything should go.
Didn't the
to some
DEC
place.
make the determination based on a visual inspection? Which would only see the large materials?
Right, that's what they said, that, oh, C&D, it's all big stuff, you could tell it right away. Which is not true.
Right.
Because it has all this other fine material mixed
So
in.
Dr. Cappy, now we have the question, the basic question. Why did Kelly Turturro write that letter? And we raised the question when Supervisor McKenna, even before the election, came to the meeting at the library when the video, Shady Business?
Shady Waters.
Shady Waters, excuse me, was shown, and our supervisor said that his hands were tied because the DEC had opined. Leaving aside all the finger pointing here, there, and the other place, is it reasonable to assume that the Attorney General had a case, the DEC ordered the material removed by Carolus, Carolus testifying in Woodstock's Supreme Court case said, yes, I moved it from those sites to 10 Church Road. Kelly Turturro uses the pretext that there are no lumps and chunks there to opine that there's nothing there that had to do with the Carolus case. So was she attempting to make a pretext that they had failed to track the material where we know the chain of custody? We know the chain of custody, how an enormous amount of contaminated material got to 10 Church Road. So the question is, why should we allow the false representation by Kelly Turturro to stand? Why should we not hold Region 3 to account for the fact that they didn't bother to track the removal of material from any one of Carolus' sites, which didn't end up in a licensed facility, but it ended up where he paid a woman at 10 Church Road to take his money to help him squirrel some of this stuff away. So that's the question, not to your expertise as a hydrogeologist, but you know how dangerous this material actually turns out to be, and why can we not hold Region 3 to account? That will help us, because there's one final part of this and then I'm done.
Well, I can't explain why
Okay.
this woman at DEC didn't want to deal with it, wasn't going to be any help. And even all we asked for was, where should the stuff go? Thinking we could maybe get the town to move it, and she wasn't telling us anything.
Okay, well, that's the
And
question.
I would guess there must be some form of corruption.
Or rank incompetence and carelessness.
Yeah, either one.
I mean, those are questions we've all been asking pretty much.
Right.
Who's next, Linda?
Marcel?
Marcel.
That's the same.
Bill McKenna and Bill McCollers sent to the Attorney
I
General.
hadn't planned on speaking
I get that for you.
tonight, but first off, I just want to say thank you to the Woodstockers United for Change. They put this together. They've been working tirelessly on this project. Nobody has an idea how many hours they've put in. As far as 10 Church Road, there's been information that came out very recently a letter to the Attorney General, signed by Bill McKenna, Anula Cordes, and Aaron Moran. And then there's some emails that we recently obtained that were written by Anula. Combination of those materials says that the town can prove the paper trail that the material from Corollas ended up in Shady. Also, in them written materials, it states that we know, or the town, the people that wrote the email or letter, they know that all of the material...
Marcel, could you get closer to the mic?
...is a problem. I don't think there's any mystery to it. The Corollas facility was shuttered because it was contaminated and it was illegal, and it ended up in 10 Church Road. So my question for the panelists is...
Finley, Philip,
Finley, the answer is obvious.
It's somewhat rhetorical. We need a little more common sense up on the Como, I think.
I would just like to hear the panelists if they're willing to answer that question. It's kind of a yes or no.
And New York State has said that Woodstock has the authority to enforce its own laws.
Actually, just to, because I didn't hear it mentioned yet, I know, Kathy, you saw the second letter from Kelly Pertura? Did you see the second one?
No.
In her second letter, she sort of reiterated in defense of her bad decision, you know, why DEC was limited in how they looked at areas like this. But then toward the end, she said, I don't understand why Woodstock isn't following its own laws anyway, because they're stricter than anything else in Ulster County. So once again, the letter that Marcel's referred to and Randall referred to that's been used as an excuse is really no excuse at all. And I think if any of you hear somebody make that excuse, you should say, well, why did Kelly Turturro say that Woodstock should follow its own law and remove the dump?
Because she was trying to cover up for her own incompetence and malfeasance and not tracking from soil.
Well, that's why she made excuses, yeah. Exactly. And Randall, she is New York DEC. She is not US EPA.
I never said EPA.
Yes, you were saying EPA.
Never once. You misheard something else in my sentence. I said she was covering up for her malfeasance. Malfeasance might have sounded like EPA to you. Okay?
It does.
Yeah, okay, so who's next?
Yeah, I just want to say, I don't think I need the mic, but I'm wondering, do we need possibly the ability to go to Cooper Lake and use that as a water source that Kingston and Ulster Township is using? And all the other questions about whether, you know, what is the rate of the plastics in our tap water? Can we use tap water at all here in this town? It's ridiculous. And, you know, I'm not used to speaking in front of crowds at all, but this whole thing is so mesmerizing and ridiculous that it's happening in this town. And that we've got like a town board that is doing nothing, apparently, about any of this stuff. No EPA, I haven't heard anything about it. In all honesty, I don't follow the local news too much. And this is a new one on me, that this stuff has been happening. And it's the source of it all and all that. As far as I know there's some kind of water tank up here in California Quarry. I don't know if we can tap into that water up there. Somewhere above, and letting this crap, and whatever you want to call it, going down the aquifer and everything, that can take 100 years, really, for that stuff to filter out. So it's like, I think it's more consequential in all this stuff. There's no way of protecting this stuff at all. And this stuff has got to be fought with, I don't know how or what or whatever, that all people of this town, business people and everything, I don't know how many business people we have here that rely on making coffee and making soups and all that kind of stuff, the restaurant stuff. I know people that there was, out on West Ohio Mountain Road, I was hitchhiking. I got a ride with a guy who said all the people are selling their properties up there. He didn't even know about what was going on. He had a house up there and he was going to get some materials to, fix his place up with. And he told me that oh yeah, there's a whole bunch of places up for sale where I'm at here. And I said, did you know about the plastics in the water? And he said, what are you talking about? And I said, well, there's a bunch of PFAS and stuff where they've had major EPA sites going on. And throughout the country, down south in wherever it was, Alabama or Louisiana.
People need to show up at town meetings.
Yeah.
People need to show up and speak passionately at town meetings and listen at town meetings. That's what needs to happen. Town.
This is horrible. This is horrible.
Yeah.
We had an asbestos problem here back in the 80s. Yeah. And there was a guy, a town superhighway guy, Bill Harder, who allowed this. He bought sewer pipe and used it for drinking water pipe because it was cheaper.
Yeah.
And then we had to deal with that stuff. And if that didn't teach this town a lesson about anything, I don't know. I don't know who the people are who populate this town board, but I suspect they don't really, most likely don't come from here for the most part, not everybody. But for the most part, I can't imagine. It seems like a lot of people move up here and they get on town boards and the Chamber of Commerce, so they know where they can make money. They can do little aspirations of along those lines.
Michael, we need to move along.
This is
Thank you.
horrible. I cannot
Thank
believe
you.
that this is happening.
Thank you.
This is horrible. With the political philosophy we got here, allegedly.
So I have a kind of multiple part question. So am I accurate that the first thing we should be lobbying our town board to do by going to town board meetings, by emailing the town board, is to not wait until we get to the 10 parts per trillion, but we can try to move them to do filtration of our water system as it is now, the water coming out of the wells going into our homes. That's the first part of my question. That's accurate, right?
I think especially if the levels keep coming back around that 3-4 part per trillion level, and especially given where the standards will be going based on what EPA is doing, that proactive filtration might make sense in this case to try and prevent that kind of longer term exposure.
Now, as you've heard, we have a contaminated area that's sitting on top of an aquifer. We also had a history in this town of the fire department at a certain time using the bad foam, that they're not doing that anymore, but we have a long history of that. There may be some other sites where we can find hot spots. How important is it for the town to try to identify hot spots where the levels of PFAS might be even higher? And what information does that give us as far as what to expect in our wells?
Yeah. Yes, certainly the more testing that can be done, the better, especially at some of those facilities that you think might be sources of contamination, or going back to the point I was making earlier about testing private wells to get a better sense of where the contamination might be. The more testing that's done, that will give you more data points to find out where the sources might be, and it's eliminating those sources that's going to prevent that future contamination that we really want to do going forward.
And would we expect higher PFAS levels at these hot spots or at these sources?
Yes, definitely, I think, yeah.
And that would eventually flow into our water system.
That's right. And another thing, I don't know if it's come up about PFAS yet, but these are incredibly not only persistent in the environment, but they move very easily through groundwater. So even if a site may be far away, those PFAS could travel and, say, reach that well field, I think, fairly easily.
Through the soil or through the water?
Mostly through the water, yeah.
Hi, my question is this. If it's beneficial for private homeowners to test their wells for PFAS, is there a way that perhaps we can lower the cost of the testing by having a large body of homeowners agree to do it with a reputable company that would give us a much better price on the testing, because they would do a lot of testing in Woodstock, and then they would also accumulate all the results and give us a better sense of what's going on here.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I'm not too familiar with companies that offer that kind of package, but I think in reaching out to them and trying to negotiate, it may be something they're interested in and would make a lot of sense.
Okay, one more answer from Nico on that question. Go ahead.
Guys, I actually don't want to this, but I really appreciate you guys having me here. The last answer I would say to that is kind of something that WIC actually really helps manage, and we try to help communities that are interested in doing stuff like that. So, figuring out what company is the best and working with them to do some testing and stuff. So if that is something you guys are interested in the future, I would be more than happy to set up a meeting with whoever is interested in doing it, and so we could set up a company with a discount and stuff like that, because that is definitely something that companies do if they provide large testing, like they provide it in bulk for discounted prices.
Good. And we're going to be putting the contact information for the organization Nico's referring to on our Facebook page and probably on the website too. That's WICC, Water Insecurity Correction Coalition. Is that right, Nico?
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just had a quick question.
Can you go to the mic so we can hear you?
Sure. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the difference between...
You can speak up a little bit?
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the difference between particle testing and visual testing. I'm not sure if you'd be the right folks to ask, but I'm wondering about the DEC's processes and how they decide to do one type of testing versus another.
I think you're referring to the C&D site at Kent Church Road. And as I said before, the C&D materials are construction and demolition debris that's been removed from buildings that have been torn down, usually in New York City, and brought up here to get rid of them. And that's where the guy over in Saugerties got the stuff from, and then put it at 10 Church Street. So most of the C&D materials are large. You could hold them in your hand, you could look at them, you can identify them. But then along with it came a lot of fine particles. So we don't know whether the fine particles are like bricks that got ground up or other C&D material, or whether it's just other stuff that came with it. It's unknown, but there certainly was a lot of fine material along with the larger material. They moved out the big material because that they knew for sure was C&D. But if they left behind all the fine material. So that's just, DEC was, in their letter, they talked about, they could visually identify it. Right, yeah, they could visually identify the big stuff. But the fine material, it might look like a bunch of sand, it might look like a bunch of sawdust, who knows?
It was referred to as dirt in one of the letters from the town.
Right.
And it's not dirt.
No. And so that's what the problem really comes down to. It's just to try to differentiate, but really to try to actually determine what those fines are would be very expensive. Because there could be 1,000 different things, and they could be all mixed together. So it's, we don't know if that is a source of PFAS. It could be dissolving in water and moving down into the groundwater, and then moving to the aquifer. We don't know.
But Catherine, can that be specifically tested for PFOS and PFOA? If we're going to, rather than test for thousands.
You test for a whole group of contaminants. So I don't remember how many there are, but there's a whole list of them that they test for when you send a sample.
I just didn't know if it was cheaper to limit the testing to the thing that we know is appearing in our water supply.
There is a list that DEC has that the labs analyze for. And as far as I remember, it's about $400 a sample. And maybe if somebody else can do it for less, I don't know. But I know when I do it, that's approximately what it cost me the last time I did my water. I have a bunch of stuff from, probably it was a old dry cleaning site. So I did do sampling there. So I had like 4 or 5 bottles of sample from there, and then I had a couple extra bottles. So I sent a bottle from my house, but separate, and paid for it separately, to see what was going on with my personal well.
Do the federal government or state have any funding source to help localities?
Well, that was another reason we went to the DEC, because I spoke with a person who I knew. I was chair of OCRA, the Ulster County Resource Recovery Agency. And we had a guy who worked there who had retired from DEC. And he said, oh, they would have money to do laboratory analysis. But Kelly Chatur never volunteered even when we asked for money for laboratory analysis for individual adults. So that's where we're at.
You know, the biggest puzzle for me, and I think the easiest thing that would our fears, is if our town would do source tracing. Find out where this is coming from. Do it, Laura. Source trace, because we're gonna know where it's coming from, and then we can do something about it. You know, we can kick all this stuff all around, but let's find out where this is coming from.
Yeah.
I don't understand that. I don't understand why they want to do that. Just do it. You owe it to the town to source, trace, so we find out where this is coming from once and for all.
They don't want the answer to be shady.
Great idea, very
Well,
difficult.
we're working, I mean, as I said before, that's part of what I'm working on. The Drinking Water Source Protection Plan is we're working on what is happening to our drinking water.
And do they know that we have PFAS in the water?
They have received a lot of reports, we've given a lot of information that is known.
So they do know that.
I believe they do, I have to go back and verify for sure, but I...
Wow, that's like so important. You would think that'd be the first thing you'd be saying to them. We have PFAS in
We've
the water.
given them the reports from the town, so they wouldn't have it.
But again, Laura, they're among the many things they're looking at, they're looking to find possible places for you to do source testing, right? And then they're going to give recommendations to the town, and it's going to take another few years. So I don't dismiss what they're doing, but they're not it's not something that's going to help us in the immediate.
We're done.
Okay.
Is that it with the list?
Yep.
Okay.
I just wanted to...
Oh, somebody else has a question.
Okay, wait, are there more questions?
Yeah.
Iris, you want to come up?
You mentioned distilling the water. Is that any better than getting a filter that removes the PFAS and the PFAS, or is it just a matter of cost?
I think they would both work effectively well.
Thank you.
I wouldn't get much.
Okay, so we're done with the questions. Just as a way of wrapping up, you see up on the screen here, there are some things that you can do. We've covered most of them. Buy filters, test your water, but here's the important ones. You gotta get involved. You gotta go to town board meetings, you have to protest, you have to write letters, and work with us. I mean, you know, nothing gets done unless you make a noise. And nothing is being done, so we do need to make a noise.
Louder noise.
Right. And if, I don't know if it's worth it or not, whether you want us to have another town hall on the shady dump. This one is really about the PFAS.
Okay, so, geez, we did it just about when we thought we were going to end. It's a little after 8:30. You guys did a great job. Thank you so much for coming. If you have questions that did not get answered tonight, post something on our Facebook page or on our website, and we'll try to get the answers for you. But right now, the priorities are that the town has to move towards source investigation, because the one thing that any of these panelists can probably tell you, especially Catherine, is if you're getting what looks like a tiny amount in your drinking water, that means that there is a much more concentrated source somewhere. And we have to find those sources.
Yeah.
So that's something that we all have to push for now. Thanks again.
I just want to thank our panelists for coming, and also want to thank Print Express. It's a wonderful business in our town, and they were extraordinarily helpful with our materials.
This is only the beginning.